The richest man who lost everything, then found what really matters. Job was the richest man of his time, a man whose name commanded respect, whose presence symbolized success, and whose life seemed to prove that righteousness and blessing always walked hand in hand. Yet his story would become one of the most profound revelations about suffering, faith, and the sovereignty of God ever recorded. The Bible introduces Job as a man living in the land of Uz, blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil, a description that comes before any mention of his wealth, reminding us that in God's eyes, character always matters more than possessions. Job was unimaginably wealthy, owning thousands of sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys, along with a vast number of servants, making him the greatest man among all the people of the East, a figure of influence whose prosperity would be comparable today to the wealth and power of the most successful figures in the modern world. Yet Job's greatest treasure was not his fortune, but his faith, because even in abundance he lived with reverence toward God, offering sacrifices on behalf of his children and guarding his heart against pride, believing that everything he had was a gift rather than an entitlement. Behind the scenes, beyond human sight, a conversation unfolded in the heavenly realms that would change Job's life forever, when Satan appeared before the Lord and questioned the authenticity of Job's faith, accusing him of loving God only because of the blessings he enjoyed. God pointed to Job with confidence, declaring that there was no one like him on the earth, a man blameless and upright, who feared God and shunned evil. Yet Satan challenged this declaration, claiming that Job's devotion would collapse the moment his prosperity disappeared. According to Satan, Job's faith was conditional, built on comfort and reward, and if God were to remove the hedge of protection surrounding him, Job would surely curse God to his face, turning loyalty into resentment. God allowed the test, not because Job was weak, but because Job was strong, placing limits on what Satan could do, revealing that even in suffering, chaos never operates outside God's authority. In a single day, tragedy struck with devastating speed as messenger after messenger arrived, each bringing news worse than the last, until Job's entire world lay in ruins. His livestock was stolen or destroyed, his servants were killed, his wealth vanished, and finally, the unthinkable happened when a violent wind collapsed the house where his sons and daughters were gathered, killing every one of them. In a matter of hours, Job lost his fortune, his legacy, and his children, experiencing a depth of grief so profound that words could scarcely contain it. Yet his response shocked not only the earth, but the spiritual realm itself. Job tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground, not in rebellion, not in accusation, but in worship, declaring that he entered the world with nothing and would leave it the same way, acknowledging that the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, and choosing to bless the name of the Lord even in unimaginable pain. This moment reveals the core of Job's faith, because his worship was not rooted in comfort, but in conviction, not dependent on blessings, but anchored in who God is, regardless of circumstances. Still, the suffering was not finished, and Satan returned, arguing that while Job could endure loss, he would not endure physical pain, insisting that if Job's own body were afflicted, his faith would finally collapse. God again permitted the trial within strict limits, and Job was struck with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head, reducing him from the greatest man in the East to a broken figure sitting in ashes, scraping his skin in agony. Even Job's wife, overwhelmed by grief and despair, urged him to curse God and die. Yet Job responded with clarity and restraint, asking whether they should accept good from God but refuse trouble, affirming that faith must remain steady even when life turns unbearable. As Job sat in suffering, his friends arrived, and at first they did the right thing, sitting with him in silence for 7 days, understanding that some pain is too deep for words. But when they began to speak, compassion gave way to accusation. They insisted that Job's suffering must be the result of hidden sin, clinging to a simplistic theology that equated blessing with righteousness and pain with punishment, refusing to accept that a righteous man could suffer without cause. For chapter after chapter, Job defended his integrity, wrestling honestly with God, expressing confusion, anguish, and longing for understanding, yet never fully turning away from the one he believed was still sovereign. Then when the debates reached their limit, God himself spoke, not with explanations, but with questions that revealed the vastness of divine wisdom and the smallness of human understanding. God asked Job where he was when the foundations of the earth were laid, whether he could command the morning, control the seas, or tame the forces of creation, confronting Job with the reality that the universe operates by wisdom far beyond human comprehension. In that moment, Job realized that what he needed was not answers, but encounter, not explanations, but presence. And he responded with humility, acknowledging that he had spoken of things too wonderful for him to understand. Job declared that while he had heard of God before, now his eyes had truly seen him, and in that revelation his suffering found meaning not through logic, but through relationship. God restored Job, blessing the latter part of his life more than the former, giving him double what he had lost, more children, long life, and renewed joy. Yet the true victory of Job's story is not found in restoration, but in transformation. Job did not worship God more after the blessing because his worship had already reached its fullness in the ashes, proving that faith rooted in God's character remains unshaken regardless of outcomes. The story of Job teaches that faith is not about understanding everything God allows, but about trusting who God is, even when answers never come. It reminds us that suffering is not always the result of sin, that God remains sovereign even when life feels out of control, and that worship is a decision made in the darkest moments, not a feeling reserved for easy seasons. Most importantly, Job's story reveals that seeing God, knowing him more deeply, and encountering his presence is worth more than comfort, clarity, or earthly security. In the end, Job lost everything that once defined his success, only to discover what truly mattered, that God alone is sufficient, faithful, and worthy, even when everything else is taken away. Subscribe to Living Word today, every Saturday at 6 p.m. Blessed be the name of the Lord.